ever. And that was the second Hmong Research Conference organized by the University of Minnesota and attended by Jacques Lemoine, Gary Lee, Yan Dao, Bruce Leatul, Tapp, Louisa Shine, Robert Cooper, and many others. That was my first visit to America at the beginning of my career, which I owe to the Hmong. And now that I'm about to retire from the Australian National University, where I've been working for 10 years, I'm invited to the Twin Cities again. So there's something very special about this for me, and I thank again the Hmong and Concordia who have invited me here. Dr. Li Pao asked me to say a few words, and I thought I would talk a little bit personally, because it may be interesting to know why someone like me should have spent most of their life working with and trying to understand Hmong culture and society. What is so special about Hmong culture that it has attracted so many foreigners and people who are not Hmong? Well, of course, Hmong culture is very special, as we all know. It's enormously rich and complex and full of unique and remarkable features. Maybe some of the things I have to say will not be too pleasant, but I shall say them anyway. I think for someone who's not Hmong, there is something romantic about this attraction. I well remember what it was that first drew my interest to the Hmong. After my first degree in English at Cambridge in England, I applied for voluntary service overseas, VSO, which is the equivalent of your Peace Corps. And I thought they'd send me to India, where I had some family background, and I traveled in India in the early 70s. But instead, they sent me to Thailand, where for 2 years I was teaching English in a big comprehensive school in southern Thailand. Then came the terrible 1976 military coup of the 6th of October, when I saw photographs in the banned newspapers of the students killed at Thammasat University in Bangkok. And indeed some of my own students, aged 15 or 16, were involved and came to hide in my house in Hat Yai. I thought I should stop working for the Thai government at that time, and I wrote to the minority rights group in London to see if they might have any work for me. They said they had not, but could I write an article for them about the hill tribes in northern Thailand? So I travelled up from the south of Thailand to Chiang Mai in the north during my vacation by myself, and I took a boat up the Mekong River. There were no organised tours then, and spent the night in a village which I only found out later was Hmong. That was still in 1976. I stayed in a wooden house with a couple of Australian backpackers. In the evening, some Shan freedom fighters dropped by, having just crossed the nearby border from Burma, and we smoked some opium. Outside, I could see mysterious people in beautiful dress, carrying babies and water, passing through the evening and speaking to each other in an unknown and mysterious language. And somehow I just wanted to know all about them, and later I was able to make Hmong the subject of my PhD thesis and come back to Thailand to do my fieldwork there in 1980 to 1981. So I think there is some idea of romanticism there, some desire to understand other people and take part in a world which is not our own world. But this urge to understand other worlds and other people is an important one, and it's part of all of us. Today some people are calling it xenology, the science or study of the other. And it's feelings like this which I think have impelled all those who have spent time with the Hmong and tried to get to know them. From Father Savina, who worked in Vietnam in the early years of the 20th century onwards. The Hmong were always described as freedom-loving, honest, fearless, upstanding, egalitarian, not bowing down to anyone else like the Thais or Lao or Chinese, who had such hierarchical societies and habits of civility. They were free mountaineers, like the Scottish Highlanders, with their clans and tartans living on the hills and mountains and moving about where they pleased. This was an enormously attractive, somewhat romantic image, and I believe it's drawn many Western observers to the Hmong. But I'd like to say the Hmong have had some part in this too. I once asked an American Hmong why there was so much on the internet and in books about the Hmong in America, but not so much on the Yunyan or the Taidam. And he thought a bit and he said, because we Hmong have loud voices. And I was surprised at this, because I'd never thought of the Hmong as having loud voices before. Indeed, mostly Hmong people in my experience prefer not to talk too much, particularly not to talk evil or gossip about other people, or to talk to outsiders about insider problems. Yet when I thought about it, I felt he might be right, because Savina had Hmong who explained Hmong customs and society to him. So did Manatsik, who worked later in Thailand, Geddes in Thailand, Lemoine, Jacques Lemoine in Laos, Cooper in Thailand, and all the missionaries too, from Tsipri Nyepo to Samuel Poa in China in the early 1900s. Everything they knew was the result of their conversations with Hmong people, learning from Hmong teachers, and doing things together with them. So slowly I began to see that the history of the Hmong and all the descriptions of Hmong culture which we have in English and French are as much a product of Hmong contributions as they are of the people who wrote them and put their names on the work. And of course, this gives us non-Hmong researchers a huge debt, an enormous debt, which can never really be repaid. And all one can do is to be conscious of it and try to reciprocate it as much as possible. I also well remember the first time I entered the village of Monyatai in northern Thailand, where I did my first field work in the early 1980s. I was introduced to it by Chupinik Kesmani, who worked at the Tribal Research Centre, but has always been a good friend to the Hmong, and by a Hmong who worked for the Royal Project. The head man was a man called Ba Sao, a Hmong Ba, and I couldn't speak very much Hmong at that time, although I had had some training in the phonetics and structure of the language. My Hmong got much better during my field work, and then it got rather rusty as I started to speak Chinese with my Chinese wife, and I now mostly speak Chinese. And it's surprising how many words are the same in Hmong and Chinese when you know something of both languages. Anyway, Ba So heard me say, I want to learn Hmong customs and write a book about it. And he said, well, we've had many people coming here trying to change our customs, but you are the first one who's ever come here who wants to learn about them. So he invited me to stay in his house for over a year. I was able to pay them back in some ways in the end, when the communists in Thailand surrendered and his brother came back to the village with his whole family with nothing. I was able to help out with rice and some other things. And that was where I mostly stayed, although he didn't get on with my research assistant, who I had to put in an empty Yunanese house in the next village, where I also sometimes stayed. But mostly I stayed with Ba Sao. And I kind of became a part of their family, and I called him Zi, and his wife Nia. And finally they adopted me into the Va clan, with a ritual sacrificing of a pig, and all the young men were paid. So I became Ba Neng Va, and I was very proud of it.